What does it take to silence one of the most powerful and incisive voices in American media? What does it take to not just win an argument, but to dismantle an entire empire built on satire and political takedowns, all during a live television broadcast? Tonight, we're not talking about a political scandal or a corporate collapse. We're talking about the night an icon of the silver screen, a man who built his career on portraying quiet dignity and explosive power faced off against the king of late-night cynicism. This is the story of how Denzel Washington, in a single fiery confrontation, allegedly led to the unmaking of Jon Stewart's television legacy. It wasn't a physical blow that landed, but a philosophical one. It was a verbal duel that exposed a fault line in our culture, a battle between the creator and the critic, the builder and the demolisher. On one side, Denzel Washington, a two-time Academy Award winner, a titan of his craft known for his meticulous preparation and profound sense of personal integrity. On the other, Jon Stewart, the revered host of The Daily Show, a man who could humble politicians and expose corporate hypocrisy with a single, perfectly timed joke. For years, Stewart was the arbiter of political cool, the man who spoke truth to power from his anchor desk in New York City. But on one fateful evening, he would find that the power he was speaking to had a voice of its own, and it was not in the mood for games. This is the story of that night, the interview that became an interrogation, the interrogation that became a trial, and the trial that brought a kingdom of comedy to its knees. Took the air. In New York City, that late October evening carried the first real bite of autumn. A damp chill swept off the Hudson, rustling the sparse browning leaves in the trees lining 11th Avenue. But inside the NEP Studio 52 home of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, the atmosphere was anything but cold. It was electric, a buzzing hive of controlled chaos that preceded every live broadcast. The audience, a mix of college students, tourists, and die-hard local fans, were crammed into the steeply raked seating, their chatter a low, expectant hum. For them, this was more than a TV taping. It was a pilgrimage to the nexus of political satire, a chance to be in the room where the day's absurdities were expertly dissected and mocked. On stage, under the glare of 100 professional-grade lights that baked the air and made everything seem sharper and more significant, Jon Stewart was in his element. He was a maestro in his own symphony hall. In the hour before taping, he'd go through his rituals: a final check of the teleprompter with his writers, a few casual jokes with the floor manager, and his signature pre-show Q&A with the audience. He was relaxed, confident, a man completely in command of his domain. He wore his uniform, a dark tailored suit, but with the tie slightly loosened, a subtle signal that he was one of them, not one of the stuffed shirts he so often eviscerated. Tonight, however, there was a different kind of energy radiating from him, a sharper edge. His head writer, a perpetually stressed man named David, had noticed it during the afternoon pitch meeting. "Are you sure about this angle, Jon?" he'd asked nervously, tapping a pen against a script. "This isn't a senator from a swing state. This is Denzel." Jon had just smiled a thin, knowing smile. "That's the point," he'd replied. "No one is above scrutiny." Miles away in a luxury suite at the Mandarin Oriental overlooking Central Park, Denzel Washington was preparing in a much different way. There was no chaos here, only a profound stillness. He had arrived in the city 2 days prior to begin the press tour for his latest film, a passion project he had also directed. It was a grueling historical drama about a little-known civil rights figure, and it was a story he felt a deep personal responsibility to tell correctly. His preparation for an interview was no different from his preparation for a role, meticulous, internal, and focused. He wasn't studying lines, but centering his thoughts. He cared about the work, the art, and the message behind it. The noise of celebrity, the talk shows, the red carpets, they were a necessary part of the machine, a transactional process he endured, but never truly enjoyed. He understood the game, but he refused to let it play him. His publicist had assured him the Stewart interview would be a home run. "He loves you, Denzel," she'd said over the phone. "It'll be a great intellectual conversation, a perfect platform for the film." Denzel, ever cautious, had simply grunted in acknowledgement. He had a deep respect for Stewart's intelligence, but he also recognized the glint of the predator in his eyes. Stewart didn't just interview people, he cornered them. Denzel wasn't afraid, but he was aware. As his driver navigated the snarling crosstown traffic towards the studio, Denzel looked out at the blur of city lights. He wasn't thinking about clever anecdotes or funny stories. He was thinking about the man whose story he was trying to tell in his film, about the weight of that responsibility. He was entering Jon Stewart's arena, but he was bringing his own world with him. When he arrived backstage, the contrast was jarring. The narrow hallways buzzed with the frantic energy of young production assistants speaking into headsets. The air smelled of burnt coffee and hairspray. He was led to a small, sterile green room. Through a monitor on the wall, he could see Stewart warming up the crowd, his face animated on the screen, his voice a familiar, mocking cadence. Denzel sat down on the stiff couch, declined a bottle of water, and closed his eyes, finding his center in the heart of the storm. He was ready to talk about his film. He had no idea he was about to fight for his reputation. Depict, the first segment of the interview, unfolded exactly as his publicist had predicted. The audience erupted in a thunderous standing ovation as Denzel walked onto the set. He greeted Stewart with a firm handshake and a genuine megawatt smile that instantly charmed everyone in the room. He was charismatic, relaxed, and eloquent. He spoke passionately about the genesis of his new film, the importance of historical accuracy, and the challenges of directing and starring in such a demanding project. Stewart, for his part, played the gracious host. He listened intently, nodded in all the right places, and asked thoughtful questions. The conversation was engaging, intellectual, and for a few brief minutes, it felt like the home run he'd been promised. The first commercial break came and went. The floor manager touched up Stewart's makeup. Denzel took a small sip of water. Everything was smooth. Then the second segment began, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Stewart leaned forward, his friendly demeanor vanishing, replaced by the focused intensity of a prosecutor. "Denzel, I want to talk about something else, if you don't mind." He began, his voice dropping slightly. "We all know you as a man who plays these incredibly noble characters, men of principle, men like Steve Biko, Malcolm X, the coach in Remember the Titans. And in this new film, another man who sacrificed everything for his beliefs." A large screen behind them, previously showing the movie's poster, flickered to life. It displayed a montage of Denzel's most iconic, heroic roles. Denzel watched, his expression neutral, though a flicker of caution entered his eyes. He knew a pivot when he saw one. "But I have to ask," Stewart continued, letting the question hang in the air as the montage faded, replaced by a complex-looking real estate document. "A few years ago, you were part of an investment group that purchased a large block of properties in a developing neighborhood in Los Angeles, a deal that, according to public records, displaced over a dozen families and several small businesses. It was all legal, of course. Smart business. You made a significant profit." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the fun celebrity worship segment they were used to. This felt different, aggressive. Denzel didn't flinch. "It was a business investment, John," he said, his voice calm and even. "A successful one. We followed every law. We provided relocation assistance that went beyond what was legally required." Stewart wasn't letting go. He cut him off, a tactic he often used with politicians. "But doesn't it feel, I don't know, a little dissonant to build a career on the image of the champion of the common man while participating in a system that can at times harm him?" The screen changed again, showing a quote from a past Denzel interview about the importance of community, now juxtaposed with a headline about the real estate deal. This was a classic Stewart ambush, meticulously researched and designed for maximum impact. He was trying to frame Denzel as a hypocrite. "I see what you're doing, Jon," Denzel said, and for the first time the relaxed charm was gone, replaced by something harder. He wasn't angry, but his focus had sharpened to a razor's edge. He leaned forward slightly, mirroring Stewart's posture subtly, reclaiming his space. "You're trying to create a narrative. You're taking two separate things and trying to weave them into a gotcha moment for your audience. I'm just asking questions." Stewart shot back a line he'd used 1,000 times, but this time it sounded hollow. "No," Denzel replied, his voice still quiet, but now carrying an immense weight that seemed to suck the air out of the studio. "You're not asking questions. You're passing judgment from a throne you've built for yourself out of clever edits and selective facts." The audience was dead silent. The production crew in the control room exchanged nervous glances. No guest had ever turned the tables this effectively, this directly. Stewart, for the first time in a long time, seemed momentarily thrown off balance. He had expected Denzel to get defensive, to stammer, to try and explain away the details of the business deal. He had not expected him to attack the very premise of the show itself. The rising action was over. Denzel had absorbed the punch and was now coiling to deliver a counter of his own. The atmosphere was no longer just tense, it was combustible. Depict, the studio lights felt hotter, the silence heavier. Jon Stewart, a master of controlling the tempo of any conversation, had lost the beat. He tried to recover, to land another jab. "So you're saying there's no connection between the values a person espouses publicly and the actions they take privately?" he asked, attempting to reframe the debate on his own terms. But the momentum had already shifted. The hunter had become the hunted. Denzel Washington didn't answer the question. He ignored it completely, as if it were a gnat buzzing in the air. Instead, he held Stewart's gaze. And in that moment, he was no longer a guest on a talk show. He was an actor in command of the ultimate stage. And he was about to deliver the monologue of a lifetime. He gestured not with anger, but with a sort of weary disappointment toward the screen behind him, which still showed the incriminating documents. Denzel began, his voice a low, resonant baritone that captivated every soul in the room, from the audience to the camera operators. "This screen, these documents, this entire segment, this is the easiest thing in the world to do, Jon." He paused, letting the words sink in. Stewart opened his mouth to interject, but Denzel raised a single finger, a gesture of such authority that Stewart's mouth snapped shut. "It is easy," Denzel continued, "to stand on the sidelines and jeer. It's easy to dig through a man's life, find what you perceive to be a contradiction, and hold it up as a trophy. It's the simplest form of argument there is. It requires no creativity, no empathy, no understanding of the complexities of a human life. It only requires cynicism." He leaned back in his chair, a picture of calm, indomitable power. "You talk about my work, the characters I play. Let me tell you about that work. To create a character, to build a story, to direct a film, you have to build something from nothing. You start with an idea, a blank page. You pour your heart, your mind, your soul into it. You wrestle with doubt, with fear, with 1,000 logistical nightmares. You collaborate with hundreds of other people, trying to unite them under a single vision. It is a work of creation. It is difficult. It is messy. And it is fundamentally an act of hope. You are trying to build something that will move people, that will connect with them, that might in some small way add something to the world." He then slowly, deliberately turned his gaze from the audience and locked it back onto Stewart. His eyes were not filled with malice, but with a piercing clarity, as if he were seeing right through the host and into the machinery of his entire enterprise. "And what do you build here, Jon?" The question was quiet, but it landed like a physical blow. What do you create? You don't build houses. You don't write stories that inspire. You don't create art. You sit in this chair and you deconstruct. You dismantle. You tear down what other people have spent their lives trying to build. You take their work, their words, their lives, and you chop them into pieces for a punchline. You've convinced yourself and an entire generation of viewers that this act of destruction is a form of truth-seeking, but it's not. It's an illusion. The control room was in a state of suspended animation. The show's director had his hands hovering over the console, unsure whether to cut to commercial, to go to a wide shot, or to just let this astonishing moment play out. The audience was transfixed, their allegiance visibly shifting with every word Denzel spoke. They had come to see Stewart slay a dragon, and instead they were watching the dragon calmly explain that the slayer's sword was made of cardboard. Denzel delivered the final devastating blow. He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. The power was in the chilling truth of his words. You've become a parasite, Jon. A very witty, very successful parasite that feeds on the complexity and imperfections of the people who are actually out there in the arena, trying to do something. You sell cynicism as wisdom and mockery as insight. You've created a generation of critics who can't create anything themselves. And the real tragedy, Denzel said, his voice softening into something almost like pity, is that I don't think this is who you started out to be. I think somewhere along the way you forgot the difference between punching up and just punching. He finished. He simply stopped talking. He had not defended his real estate deal. He had not argued the specifics. He had done something far more profound. He had held up a mirror to Jon Stewart and his entire philosophy, and the reflection was not flattering. In the deafening silence that followed, Jon Stewart had no witty retort, no clever comeback. He just sat there under the heat of the lights in the ruins of his own making. The king had been checkmated in his own court, not by a better argument, but by a bigger truth. Teep took the silence. Lines in the studio stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was a dense, heavy quiet, broken only by the low hum of the electronic equipment. The on-air sign was still illuminated, a bright red reminder that this was all happening live broadcast to millions. Jon Stewart's face, usually so animated and expressive, was a blank mask. He looked smaller in his chair, stripped of his usual armor of irony. The architect of 1,000 takedowns had been architecturally dismantled himself, and he had no blueprint for how to respond. With the quiet dignity that had marked his entire career, Denzel Washington unclipped the small microphone from his jacket lapel. He placed it gently on the table between them, a gesture of finality. He stood up, smoothing the front of his suit. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't say thank you for having me. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, not to Stewart, but to the main camera, as if acknowledging the audience who had just witnessed the spectacle. Then he turned and walked off the stage. He didn't storm off. He didn't rush. He walked with the same measured, powerful gait he'd had when he arrived, disappearing into the darkness backstage before the director in the frantic control room finally yelled, "Cut to commercial, now!" The screen abruptly switched to a garish ad for a fast food chain, a jarring transition from profound moral theater to mundane commerce. Backstage, the usual post-segment buzz was absent. Crew members avoided eye contact with each other, speaking in hushed tones. Denzel's publicist was waiting for him, her face pale. He walked past her without a word, collected his coat, and was out the studio's side door and into the cool night air before anyone could think of what to say. He had come to discuss his art. Instead, he had been forced to defend his character, and in doing so, had exposed the character of the man interrogating him. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By the next morning, the clip was everywhere. It wasn't just viral, it was a cultural atom bomb. Hashtags like #DenzelTruth and #TheSilencing of Stewart dominated social media. The narrative was not what Stewart's team had intended. It wasn't Denzel the hypocrite. It was Denzel the philosopher and Jon Stewart the bully. Pundits from every corner of the media landscape weighed in. For years, Stewart had been praised as a vital voice, a check on power. But Denzel's monologue had reframed him in a new, unflattering light. Was he a satirist or just a cynic? Was he promoting critical thinking or just corrosive doubt? The show's ratings, once unassailable, began to slide. First it was a trickle, then a torrent. Sponsors, particularly those who cultivated an image of positivity and creation, grew nervous about being associated with the show. Whispers of internal strife at the network grew louder. Stewart, once the confident maestro, appeared shaken on air in the following days. His jokes seemed to lack their usual bite. His confidence was visibly eroded. He tried to address the Denzel interview once with a dismissive joke, but it fell flat. The magic was gone. Denzel hadn't just won an argument, he had shattered the illusion. He had revealed the man behind the curtain, and once the audience saw him, they couldn't unsee him. Weeks later, the network released a joint statement. Jon Stewart would be stepping down from The Daily Show to pursue new creative challenges. It was the standard sanitized language of corporate separation. But everyone knew the truth. An empire of satire had crumbled. Not from external political pressure or scandal, but from a single 3-minute monologue delivered by a man who refused to be torn down, and who in his defense highlighted a profound truth. True strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the integrity to build. Denzel Washington went on to release his film, which received critical acclaim. He rarely, if ever, spoke of that night. He didn't need to. His actions and the silence that followed had said everything. Took this story, though a fictionalized account, touches upon a very real tension in our modern world. It forces us to ask ourselves some difficult questions. In our hunger for authenticity and our desire to hold powerful people accountable, where do we draw the line? When does scrutiny become cynicism? When does criticism stop being constructive and start being corrosive? We live in an age of hot takes and instant judgment where tearing someone down can generate more clicks and views than building something up. Jon Stewart in our story represents that powerful, seductive force of criticism. Denzel Washington represents the quieter, more difficult path of creation and personal integrity. So who do you think was right in this clash of titans? Is it the media's absolute right and duty to question and expose every perceived hypocrisy of our public figures, no matter how personal? Or is there a moral boundary? A point where such attacks do more harm than good, not just to the individual but to our culture as a whole? What would you have done if you were in Denzel's shoes facing an ambush on live television? Let us know your thoughts and your own moral compass in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you and made you think, please give this video a like. It truly helps our channel grow. Share it with a friend or on your social media. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more deep dives into the defining moments and moral dilemmas of our time. The ultimate lesson here is one of profound and timeless value. In a world that is loud with criticism and judgment, your character is the one thing that speaks for you when you are silent. While it may be tempting to engage in battles on the terms set by others, true power lies in elevating the conversation and standing firm on the foundation of your own integrity, and in remembering that it is always harder and ultimately more valuable to build than it is to destroy.